So this is for connecting to the network so that your SIM is valid, right? So whenever you want to make the call, you will be able to do that. You will be able to receive SMS. You will be able to receive phone calls and so on. So that is normally what is called as the fixed subscription charge. It can be for a fixed term. Every month you might have to renew, or it can be for lifelong. The second type of charge is the usage charge. So this basically depends upon the amount of usage, the consumption. So we don't have to really talk about voice telephony because voice telephony is become extinct. So we will mostly concentrate on data usage, right? So the how much amount of data that you download, it can be a fixed charge or it can be a variable charge. Fixed charge, we will discuss about the differences between fixed and variable charges later on. Then there can be other additional charges, such as, for example, roaming charges. Domestic roaming charges do not exist in India, thanks to all the operators who operate pan India. But there is an international roaming charge, which is normally levied when you visit other countries. So when you visit other countries, the operator in the home country has an agreement with the operator in the foreign country, so that you'll be able to use the SIM of the home operator in order to log into the network of the foreign operator. So because of this transaction cost that is involved, there is often a levy which is put on the roaming as a roaming charge when you visit international, and roaming charges are exorbitantly high, right? So for example, I don't know how many of you experience this. Anybody, Adrej or anyone else, can you tell what the roaming charges are as of now if you visit any other country like Singapore or Dubai or US or Europe for voice and data? Do you have any idea? Rachel, Chandrima? Chandrima should be knowing. I think she used to travel quite a bit. Any idea? You're typing in the chat box, I won't know because chat box is not visible to me.
Sir, it's about 1500, 2000 rupees for 10, 12 days, 2 weeks.
So it's in thousands, right? For data usage, it is like thousands of rupees for 1 week. The outgoing calls from an international location, voice telephony call normally costs like 50 rupees per minute, things like that, right? SMS is like 25 rupees per SMS, outgoing. Normally, incoming SMSs are mostly free if you roam on international networks, but incoming calls in a roaming network are also charged. It's a little bit low. For example, it might be in the range of 20 to 25 rupees per minute of receiving the call. So roaming charges are quite high, right? And roaming data charges are also very, very high because of this transaction cost that is involved between the network operator in the home country and the network operator in the foreign country. So, but we will not discuss too much about the roaming charges. Then there can also be bundling charges. For example, if it is not very common in India, but it is very common in the US to bundle handsets, as we discussed before. So the handset price prorated for the subscription period is also included as the pricing scheme, in the pricing scheme. So what we will concentrate today is this, right? So we'll basically concentrate on the usage charges is what that is of interest to us, and we'll focus on that. How much to charge? Okay. Now, so as we discussed before, there is a fixed charge and there's a usage charge. The usage charge can also be fixed or it can be variable. So we'll discuss something about that later on. Now, there can also be some variations in the prices. It can be function of time of day. I don't know, you are not, you have not experienced this, but in the early days, I think until about 2002, 2003, all of us used to sort of I mean, there used to be PCOs, right? Public call offices. And whenever you want to make an international call or even national long distance call, mobiles were not very common at that time. So you used to go to the PCO in order to make the call. So in the PCO, there will be huge lines starting at 9 a.m., 9 p.m., right? So 9 p.m. onwards, the rates used to be cut to half, and therefore all the people will land up in front of the PCO at 9 o'clock to make the call at half the price. So it can be a function of time of day. It can also be a function of end-to-end distance, right? So in the case of circuit switch networks using voice telephony, the network resources are tied up for the entire duration of the call along the path from the origin to the destination, and therefore it makes sense for voice telephony operators to charge based upon the end-to-end distance as well, right? So for example, the calls to the US will cost much more than calls to Singapore and so on. But the most important thing is that with the evolution of, for example, the 3G and LTE networks, the circuit switch, the core network has moved from circuit switching to packet switching. And therefore, as we have discussed earlier, in the case of packet switching, the resources are not tied up for the entire duration of the call from the origin to destination. And therefore, Reliance was one of the first company to introduce this depth of time, depth of distance, right? So which means that irrespective of the time at which you make the call or irrespective of the distance to which you make the call, the price is the same, right? So that is mainly due to the conversion of most of the circuit switch networks to packet switch networks, right? So that is one of the things that happen. So even today, for example, if you make a call at any time, it does, I mean, still, if my parents or your grandparents will still think, will be in the old mode, right? Oh, let us make a call at after 9 o'clock and things like that. But that concept has vanished, right? So it is the depth of time and depth of distance, and therefore you are not priced based upon the time or the distance. Okay. Now, if you look at, any questions?
Yes, sir.
So,
Sir, how is it a profitable model with depth of distance?
how is the?
How are you making a profit with depth of distance?
So the reason, Rachel, for depth of distance is that if you have a packet switch network, right, the
Right.
resources from the origin to the destination are not tied up, right? So it is all shared resources, and therefore,
Oh, okay.
with
That's
shared resources, the distance, the effect of distance on the cost of carrying the call from origin to destination actually reduces, right? And
reduced.
that's
Okay.
one of the reasons. Yeah. Okay. Now, data tariff plans. So we are basically looking at usage pricing. And so we are basically concentrating on usage pricing. So the usage pricing plan can vary like this. So this is the monthly usage and this is the price. And if you look at the pricing plans, it can be like this, right? Or it can be like this, or it can be like this. Now let us term 1, this is 2, and this one is 3. So somebody has to explain to me what this 1, 2, and 3 are. Chandrima or Mayank, Adrej, any of you guys, Janvi, what is the difference between 1, 2, and 3? Anybody can switch on the mic and tell me? Guys, take a shot.
So can I try?
Yeah, sure.
So 2 looks like it's a minimum threshold sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
So for a certain basic rate it remains the same, and then after that it beyond say 2 gigabytes it starts increasing linearly. Uh, One is a max threshold sort of situation. It's like the opposite of two. So there, up till 10 gigabytes, it's a constant cost, and then it starts increasing linearly. And three seems to be like a hybrid of one and two.
Okay, Rajul, you have a set of users. Okay, there are light users, there are heavy users, right? So light
Okay.
users are like Dumbo, like me, who check email and things like that. Heavy users like Rajul, see HD video. Now, who will prefer which one? Light users, what will be their preference with respect to the usage pricing plans? Light usage guys.
Light users would probably prefer two.
2, and then heavy users
One.
1 possible, right? And the average user 3, something like that.
Three.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now the question is, how should the operator choose which plan is suitable for which guys? I mean, see, okay, let me go to the next slide. Now, the important thing is that for any pricing plan, there will be a demand, right?
Mhm.
And the demand will go over a period of time, and it might go like this, right? So initially, people are just getting adjusted, and after that, the demand will grow across the network. Now, in tune with the demand, the network operator also has to increase the capacity, which is the supply, right? So the supply also has to grow exponentially. It may not be exactly like this. Normally, in a telecom network or any other data network, it can be a step function, right? It can go like this, like this, like this, and so on. Because once you put in some amount of infrastructure, that can give capacity up to certain limits, and after that, you might have to increase it over a period of time. So, but let us approximate this using this particular curve, right? So this is the supply curve and this is the demand curve. Now, for if in this particular region, right, in this particular region, the operator does not have any problem because the demand is less than supply. But once you hit this threshold, the demand goes higher than supply, and therefore there is a lot of congestion in the network, right? And therefore, the operator has to keep on increasing the supply or adjust the pricing plan such that the demand is in tune with the supply. Okay, so there are two things that the operator can do. For example, in this case, the supply you can keep on increasing, but it requires capital costs, right? It requires capital expenses. On the other hand, there can be something that can be done in order to, for example, tune the demand, tune the demand such that the demand curve actually matches the supply curve. Can you think of any method? See, the first one is very, very straightforward. You increase the network capacity, but it requires a lot of capital expenditure, right? So the operator has to put in a lot of investment. On the other hand, the other option is to tune the demand so that it is in tune with supply. What could be the possible methods for tuning the demand? How can you tune the demand?
So price discrimination.
Price discrimination. Okay. So explain a little bit more. How do you do that?
So we saw this earlier as well. If we charge whatever the consumer is willing to pay, so
Hmm.
their demand, if we match the supply to the demand, so if we charge according to the demand curve, then all the consumer surplus will get shifted to the producer surplus.
Okay. So for example, in this curve, right? So if, for example, if we treat, if we have this kind of plan, it is quite possible that up to this point, right, the demand will be high, demand will shoot up. Then after that, for every bit that you are going to send, there is a linear pricing scheme. And therefore, the user will be sort of hesitant to use beyond this particular threshold, right? So if this point is reached here, then it is possible that the demand might actually shift towards the supply curve because the usage price increases quite a bit linearly with respect to usage, right? So that is one way by which, using appropriate pricing plans, it's possible to tune the demand towards the supply curve. Are there any other methods? I don't know who is talking. I am not able to see that.
There, so we see different types of plans here. Why can't
Yeah.
just why can't they provide all the plans,
Okay.
like different plans for different users? They can use whatever
Okay.
they want to based on. So why the supplier has to decide what to give? The
Ah,
consumer
good
can
point. Good
decide,
point.
right?
Good
What they
point.
can.
Good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So it is actually, the demand is originating from the consumers, right? So if the consumers have a lot of options, then they will choose. They are rational enough to choose to optimize their pricing plan, right? So these their interest to choose a plan which minimizes the payout, at the same time meets their requirements. So that is absolutely possible, right? So assume that all these plans are available. That is one way, right? Using, providing various pricing plans to the consumers so that they can choose whatever they want, and the pricing plans should be designed such that the demand curve will be closer to the supply curve. That is one definitely possible. Are there any other methods? Are there any other methods by which you can tune the demand towards the supply curve so that you don't end up into congestion problems?
So I'm not sure
Any
this is
other methods?
applicable or not, but
Yeah,
a while back we were talking about like high frequency and low frequency carrier waves.
right,
So for a larger area, we were talking about low frequency, right? And for
right,
higher bandwidth, we were talking about higher frequency.
correct.
So is it possible that we could use higher frequency carrier waves for a higher demand the users?
Yeah. So that so I see what I mean by supply here is the aggregate supply in the network. Okay, so
Oh, okay.
I have abstracted these details out, right? So this is the network capacity which is available across low frequency, high frequency bands,
Okay.
right? So the user might log into lower frequency or higher frequency depending upon where they are and so on.
Where they are and
Now
all.
let's think about other things, right? So for example, let's say that going back to the time based pricing plan, can the time based pricing plan be tuned such that you can shift the demand towards the supply?
They can actually so this is the demand for, let's say, something. They can bundle it with the demand of any other thing, such that the demand curve can shift.
Okay, okay, um, okay. So
Just like
let
we
us
have
go through.
plans and you are getting Hotstar or Netflix subscription.
Hmm.
That will change the demand and the supply.
Okay, okay. So let us go through this. Let's go through this. I want to. Okay. So let us see this, right? See, this is the probability that any user will be on this particular curve. This is the usage curve. These are high usage and these are low usage, right? These are high usage, this is low usage. So usage goes along this particular x direction. And this is the probability that a user will be there on any part of this particular curve, right? Now, if you look at this, Rajul, what can you make out?
You can see that the heavy users have a low probability of occurrence.
So there is a very low probability, or the proportion of the users who are heavy
Yeah.
users, right? Or general, if it is quite possible to make this assumption, I think, that the people who use the network very heavily may be in the long tail. This is called as the long tail, right? So but even though proportion of the users are very less, because of the high usage, they might actually throttle the network, right? So this is the long tail. But most of the median users will be like this, right? And if you are a network provider, will you design the network for a low usage, medium usage, or heavy usage?
Medium users.
Medium usage, right? Now, if you design the network for medium usage, obviously you are going to have congestion problem because of the heavy usage, even though it is a long tail, right? It is quite possible that you will end up in this kind of problems, right? So as we discussed before, the options for the operator: increase the price for the heavy usage guys so that they throttle, they do that, or cap it, right? So cap, much like whatever we have done earlier. So you cap it at certain capacity, and after that you have a very steep usage plan, and therefore people are not encouraged to use beyond certain limits. You can also use throttling, right? So for example, if you have a congestion problem, throttle the heavy users, right? Throttle the heavy users. So bring down their speed from 2 Mbps to crawling speed of 256 kilobits per second or something like that, right? So that they are dissuaded to use, or they will have poor quality of service. Or you can offload, right? Offload it to other networks, such as, for example, Wi-Fi networks. So if proactively offloading, right? So most of the times when you walk into your hostel or at home, your mobile switches from mobile broadband to Wi-Fi, right? So that you use Wi-Fi. Now, operator can also proactively switch the user from a mobile broadband, that is the cellular network, to the Wi-Fi network to offload the heavy usage traffic, right? So that is actually there in the 3GPP 3GPP standards. So the operators have the option. I mean, if, for example, that is one of the reasons why, for example, the Wi-Fi and the mobile broadband are complementary to each other. So if, for example, you get an Airtel mobile broadband connection and you have an Airtel landline network with Wi-Fi access point, then it is possible that the Airtel knows that you have a Wi-Fi access point. Whenever you come into your home or whenever your usage increases, it can possibly shift you from your mobile broadband network to the Wi-Fi network. So that is known as offloading. That is also possible. Or the last option is the smart data pricing. See, for example, in any of these options, right? So there are some advantages and disadvantages. Raising prices, consumer surplus reduces. If you put a cap on the usage, then you are basically reducing the quality of service. And also you are putting an artificial barrier for usage. You are throttling, definitely you are doing discrimination, right? Discrimination against the heavy usage guys, right? So that's not good. That is not good from the consumer surplus point of view. If you offload, it is okay. Offloading is perfectly okay as long as you have a method to offload, right? Method to offload from a mobile broadband network to a Wi-Fi network. But the smart data pricing is going to be the future by which the operators can do data pricing based upon the usage profile of the user. So that's what we will discuss in this particular session. Okay, as we discussed. Yeah. So there are two extreme cases of pricing. Right? This is a flat rate based pricing and a usage based pricing. So, for example, if you look at pricing, extreme cases, we'll let us use the extreme cases. So this is the price per unit, and this is the usage. You can have flat rate based pricing. So this is flat rate. Or you can have usage based pricing, right? This is usage based. So you have flat rate or usage based pricing. These are the extreme cases, right? So in the case of usage based pricing, the price increases linearly with respect to the usage, whereas in the case of flat rate, it remains the same. It remains the same. Now, if you look at the usage based, yeah.
What are PNX?
So this is the price. And X
Okay.
is the quantity, the price.
Okay.
In the case of usage-based pricing scheme, the average usage-based price is something like P star. This is the demand curve of the consumer. This is the demand curve, downward sloping demand curve, normal demand curve. Now, if the average usage price is P star, then we know that this is the consumer surplus and this is the producer surplus. This part of the demand curve subscribes and this part of the demand curve does not subscribe. Right? Now, when you look at flat rate based pricing scheme, this is the flat rate, P double star. How does it change? This is the demand curve. Right? Now, there are some users whose willingness to pay is more than the fixed flat rate that is being charged by the operator. So this is the consumer surplus as we have discussed earlier, and it's perfectly okay. But because it is flat rate, right? In the case of flat rate, the users who's subscribing, right, will be willing to consume up to this level because there is no usage based pricing, right? So you pay 149 rupees per month and you have unlimited data usage, right? So it is in the interest of everyone who pays 149 rupees to increase their data usage to unlimited, right? So which means that until you hit this particular point in the demand curve, they will continue to consume, right? Because it is flat rate, right? So because it is flat rate meaning unlimited usage, and therefore everybody will be sort of, even if they don't want, they would like to consume as much as possible. So it is as if the price is zero and they consume this extra piece, and this is the extra consumer surplus that they get. However, this consumers, right, even though they are trying to consume, they are forced to consume, meaning that because it is flat rate, they are forced to consume, and in effect they would have liked not to consume, and therefore there is a negative consumer surplus, which is this area. That's the difference between the price that is charged and their willingness to pay, because their willingness to pay is below the price. So this is the negative consumer surplus that is accrued because of the flat rate based pricing scheme. Is it clear? So in the case of flat rate based pricing, there are consumers like this who is willing to pay, right? 149 rupees per month. Chalo, I am a heavy user, it's okay, I will pay 149 rupees, right? So their willingness to pay is greater than or equal to the price. But there are certain users, right, who are induced into subscribing to this plan, but they are light users, right? So their willingness to pay, I mean, is basically less than 149, but there is no option, therefore they subscribe to 149. Because it is unlimited usage, they would try to maximize their consumption up to this point. But since they are light users, their willingness to pay is less than price, and therefore they end up with a negative consumer surplus as well. So basically, the consumer surplus in the case of a flat rate based pricing scheme is this area plus this area and then minus this area. Is that clear, Rachel? Any question on this?
Yes, sir.
So
Couple questions.
yeah.
Uh, so in the under usage price scheme,
Yeah.
only the first triangle is the consumer surplus, is it?
Yes.
And
Because
there's
these
no
guys
derivative
are not
of.
subscribing. These guys are not subscribing.
Okay, I see. Okay, okay. But
Why
that's
they are
not
not
getting
subscribing?
lost,
Because
man.
the unit rate is high for them, and therefore their willingness to pay is less, and therefore they don't subscribe. Because whenever they subscribe, they are charged, right, for every
Hmm.
bit they consume.
Okay. And isn't the positive consumer surplus that's being added in the
Hmm.
flat rate price scheme eh, negated by the negative consumer surplus? Like, aren't they
Yes, yes.
equal?
So that really depends upon what this demand curve is, right? So, for example, have a demand curve like this. I'll go to the next one. That's a good point. So, for example, you have different kinds of demand curves, right?
Right.
This is the average demand curve. This is elastic or inelastic, relatively elastic or relatively inelastic,
Relatively inelastic, right?
relatively inelastic, right?
Yeah,
And this is relatively elastic.
correct.
Now, for these guys, right, the
Hmm.
consumer surplus is this plus this
Hmm.
minus this, right?
Oh, okay, okay, okay,
Okay.
okay.
For this guys, this plus this
Hmm.
minus this.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
So, is there any indication that flat
But in
rate
both cases, it
based
looks like
pricing
the
scheme? Yes.
additional, in both cases, it looks like the additional consumer surplus is equal to the additional negative consumer surplus.
We have to prove that, Rachel. I'm not. We have to prove. We have to
But
prove
is
whether
it
it is
true?
equal or
Is
not.
it like, is it true? Is it a theorem?
So the theorem says that the flat rate based pricing scheme penalizes light users. For example, the consumer surplus in the case of flat rate based pricing scheme for a heavy
Okay.
user is more than the consumer surplus for the light user. But that makes sense, right?
Oh,
That makes
okay,
sense
okay.
because
Yeah,
heavy user is the one who prefers flat rate based pricing
correct,
because he is
correct.
actually his consumer surplus is very high because he's willing to spend.
Yeah,
He's willing to. He has the need for high data consumption,
the
and
high,
therefore flat rate based pricing scheme works for them, right?
correct.
Whereas the light user, he's forced to consume, and even though he may not have the need to consume, and therefore the consumer surplus for a heavy user is greater than the consumer
Surplus
surplus
for the
for
light.
a light user.
Okay.
And also the consumer surplus for a relatively inelastic user is greater than consumer surplus for a relatively elastic user. Does that make sense? An inelastic user, right? Inelastic user, he's not bothered too much about the price. And therefore, whatever the flat rate that is given, he will take it, even if it is high, because he
Even if
has a
that,
heavy
okay.
usage.
Okay.
Whereas in the case of
An
elastic
elastic
customer,
user, he
the
won't care
high
about.
flat rate will prevent them from subscribing. Or even if
Hmm,
they subscribe, they don't know what to do with it.
I see.
So these are the two axioms we have to prove that. I have not proved it here.
Okay. Fair.
So so this is the effect of flat rate basing. I mean, the reason why flat rate based pricing scheme is important is that in the US and also in some of the European countries, when they for a long time they used flat rate based pricing scheme. The reason was that it is easier to administer, right? There is only a couple of pricing plans that you need to give to the consumer, and the consumers are not confused by the various pricing schemes that are offered. But soon they found out that it favors heavy users, and the heavy users in the long tail can actually create congestion, right? So they ended up facing a lot of congestion problems because of flat rate based pricing. In India is one of the very few countries where we did what is called as it's not here. So we used what is known as paisaification, right? Paisaification. That was invented by Tata Docomo, which was earlier one of the telecom companies. Now it is bankrupt, as you know. So this is the term that Tata Docomo used, paisaification, which means that it is sachet-based pricing, sachet-based pricing scheme. So like shampoo you get for 10 rupees or 5 rupees, you can buy data usage for 5 rupees, 10 rupees, top up, all these prepaid plans are according to this. Right? So you buy whatever you need, but mostly these pricing plans are not flat rate, but it is usage based pricing, but it is very much useful for light users, right? Who just want to use it on a demand basis, as pay as you demand, pay as you demand, or whatever it is, right? So that is paper use. So paper use using this kind of a sachet pricing was invented by Dr. Docomo, and we have used it. So in fact, most of the carriers in the US and Europe who used flat rate pricing, which favored heavy users, slowly shifted towards usage based pricing scheme over a period of time. Any questions on this? Are you okay? Okay. So let us move on. Let's skip this. We'll come back. So how do we model the pricing schemes, right? So we will model it using a utility function. We can use any type of utility function, but we will, for the stylistic representation, we'll use a concave log function, such as this. And it also represents diminishing marginal utility because, for example, I always give this example, right? You give Mayank jalebi. First jalebi, he will eat it with a lot of enthusiasm. Second, yes, he will eat it with almost the same kind of enthusiasm. But by the time he reaches the 100th jalebi, he will say, no, I don't want to go to the hospital, right? So which means that this is a diminishing marginal utility. As you consume more and more, it is quite possible. I mean, it is a stylistic representation. You can always argue that it is not a concave function, and therefore the marginal utility does not decrease with increase in usage. But this is the typical model that we will plan to use in order to figure out what the pricing schemes are. So this is the quantity that is demanded, and this is the price, but this quantity and price are interrelated, right? As we discussed before. So in general, if the quantity, if the price increases, quantity decreases, the quantity decreases, then the price, it will have some price effect and so on, right? If the quantity demanded is less, then the operator is expected to lower the price, right? Because the supply curve is upward sloping, and therefore the operator will tend to reduce the supply. And if the supply is less, he will obviously price it less, and so on. So there is a fixed component and there is a usage component. So let us use the utility function, a log function of the quantity that is consumed. The price has two components. One is the fixed component, G is the fixed component, and H is the usage based pricing scheme. So it is like this, right? So you have G, this is G, this is G, and this is the slope of this part of the pricing function. So H is this linear pricing model, and G is the fixed component. The net utility of the
quick
consumer.
question. Is it
Yeah,
Px equals G plus Hx or P equals G plus Hx?
P. It
P.
is, sorry, P. P.
Yeah.
P is equal to G plus Hx,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So net utility is utility minus Px, right? Correct. Utility is equal to this net utility is equal to the utility by consuming X units minus unit price multiplied by X, the quantity consumed. So we have the net utility V of X is equal to U of X minus P of X, which is equal to A log X minus of G plus Hx. If you're a consumer, you maximize the net utility for consumption. So the consumption that is optimized for each and every consumer is going to be by making the first derivative equal to 0, and therefore it is A by X minus H equal to 0, and therefore X is equal to X is equal to A by H. Is that clear? That is X star. That is the quantity that the consumer will consume to maximize the utility. Now, from the operator point of view, what is the price that he will fix, right? What is the price that he will fix? He will look at the utility. He will fix the price when the utility is equal to Px, right? He will keep on increasing the price until the net utility becomes equal to 0. Because if the net utility becomes negative, the user will not subscribe. And therefore, the ideal condition for the operator to fix the price is this. So which means this is A log X is equal to Px. And you can substitute X here in order to find out P. Is that clear? And the P comprises of G plus Hx. So you can substitute X and then you can find out what G and H are going to be. Any questions on this? Is that okay? So this is the consumer's condition and this is the operator condition for fixing the price. And X and price are related to each other. Is that okay?
So
Now,
one thing again.
yeah.
Could
Yeah.
you just go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
When you're taking the derivative, are you taking it with respect to P or with respect to Px?
V. This is V. The consumer would like to maximize.
No, but I thought
the net.
P is equal to G plus Hx. So wouldn't
Yes.
Px be equal to Gx plus Hx square?
Oh, sorry. See, Rajul, I have to go back on this, right? So actually, this price is actually G plus Hx. The price is, what shall I say? Px is equal to G plus Hx. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. Right? Because this has the fixed component as well as the variable component multiplied by X.
By X. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I had a mistake. So the price that the consumer pays is actually G plus Hx.
Okay.
For any X.
Got it.
The fixed component plus the variable component. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
So if you look at this table, right, for various values of G, the fixed rate, H, the variable pricing rate, X, the quantity, G plus Hx, which is the price, and the proportion of G and proportion of H in the overall pricing scheme. If you look at this, there are some indications, right? So for example, the X is low when the fixed charge is very less and the variable charges are high. X is high when G is high and X is low. Correct? So which means that To maximize the revenue, which is indicated by the price here, the operator is better off having a high fixed cost and a low variable cost. Does that make sense? So it is in the operator's interest to maximize revenue by fixing a low usage charge but a very high fixed cost. So which means that in the pricing scheme, the optimal one would be the one which starts somewhere here, right, and has a very small slope. So this G is very high and the slope SH is small. This is optimal for the operator. Does that make sense? But of course, this indicates that is the pricing scheme that is optimal for the operator encourages heavy users. The consumer surplus for the light user gets a hit based on this. So, in fact, putting a very high charge for the fixed usage with unlimited usage, with almost unlimited usage, meaning that G is high and H is close to zero, right? Approximately close to zero is a better option for the operator. That is one of the ways by which the pricing scheme can be pitched by the operators to heavy users. Any questions on this? So that is one of the reasons why, for example, most of the operators. So, however, here we are considering just the utility function of the consumers and the pricing plan of the operators. So we do not consider, for example, network constraints and things like that, which we need to consider. That's one of the reasons why most of the operators in the US switched to flat rate based pricing scheme with very high G and low H. But soon after that, the heavy users created network congestion and they had to alter the plans accordingly. So that is one of the reasons for the relevance of flat rate based pricing scheme with fixed G and very low H. Any questions on this? Rajul, Chandrima, anyone else? So tomorrow we'll come back and discuss how we can take into account the capacity constraints, because as we know, in this kind of pricing plan, the heavy users are more inclined to subscribe, and even though they are on the long tail, it is possible that they can create congestion and drive the low usage users out of the network. And how do we match the supply and the demand using constraints is one of the things that we can look at. We'll also look at time-based pricing scheme in the next class. So I'll stop here and then ask Janvi to sort of prepare for the presentation. Janvi?
Yes, sir, we are ready. Can you give me the presenter access?
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Yeah.
Your number, Janvi? Your IMTech ID?
506, 2019, 506.
Yeah, I've given you access.
Okay, just give us a minute. Yeah.
Yes, Janvi, it's visible.
I hope I'm audible, sir.
Yes, yes, perfect. Go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
we'll start. So good afternoon, everyone. We are Group 5, and I'm Abhigna, and we're going to present the paper, The Sharing Economy Meets Reality. So first of all, uh, yeah, what is a sharing economy? The sharing economy refers to a system where people who may not know each other can, there are some underutilized assets which can be accessed and shared by people through like maybe an application or some digital platform or other marketplaces without necessarily owning the product. For like the basic examples would be ride sharing and room sharing, crowdfunding, personal services, and video and audio streaming services. So generally, these are web platforms that bring together entities or individuals who have these services or who can provide these assets with people who would like to rent those assets short term. These services may range from spare time. Fiverr is an app, website or application which basically where people can offer like services. Maybe someone who wants a dance choreography or something can purchase it from someone on Fiverr who's a dancer. Or then there are companies like Uber, Ola, Rapido, Lyft, which provide cab services. Then we have companies like Airbnb, which provide like rooms for rent or houses for rent. Some other examples in the Indian context might include Urban Club, which connects local service professionals. Then we have Rebel Foods, cloud kitchen and a delivery platform, which will allow restaurants to share kitchen space and also has resources to offer more efficient delivery services. Like multiple, uh, we can order from multiple restaurants at the same time. Then we have Meesho, which connects resellers with suppliers to sell products through social media. And this Meesho actually has become quite popular in apartment communities. Then we have our Swiggy, Zomato, Dunzo, which is our hyperlocal delivery platform that allows users to request pickup and delivery of various items. And finally, another example would be Furlenco, which is a furniture rental platform that allows users to rent furniture for their homes. These sharing economy companies basically have provided consumers with affordable and accessible options for various services and products, probably without not sometimes not even having to purchase them fully. However, as I mentioned earlier, the growth of the sharing economy has raised concerns about regulation and the impact on traditional industries and revenues. So, in many ways, these sharing economy startups or companies are an outgrowth of normal social media platforms, which are based on peer-to-peer technology, and they also actually sometimes threaten established companies to the extent, not to the extent, basically because peer-to-peer networks can grow exponentially through the power of platform dynamics and network effects. I would like to talk more about this peer-to-peer architecture. So, what is P2P architecture? So sharing economy is mostly associated with P2P ventures. Broadly speaking, this technology employs a network where individuals are put in direct contact with each other in some form, like through the internet or some other connection. The simplest example would be a telephone call to a friend. It could be considered a form of P2P. In contemporary situations, however, P2P refers to computer based systems where information is shared directly with others via the internet. And it has its roots in locally based hardware arrangements. But in the internet age, it usually refers to specific applications rather than just hardware arrangements. So this peer-to-peer philosophy and architecture basically eliminate the direct client-server relationships and they link individuals as peers. Users in a P2P network, they can pool their resources, they can share each other's files and storage systems, applications, and so on. Basically, they allow extensive collaboration and efficient information sharing. So I'd like to mention the first known example of P2P technology, which was in the late 1990s, 1999, I guess. It was Napster, which was a music file sharing system. So it consisted of a very large network of millions of personal computers where anyone could upload a music, basically a song, any MP3 file, irrespective of the copyright for the file, any audio basically, and anyone can download it as well. The problems with though Napster was not trying to make revenue in general, the problem was the copyright issues, and the website was taken down. In this day and age, Napster does exist, but it actually provides like paid services. You need to pay to access the audio. Then there was Freenet, which was the next. Napster was the first well-known example. Then we had Freenet, which was in the 2000s, is the next well-known example of P2P technology. And in this case, there were no central repositories. There were anonymous encrypted files that could be shared directly by the users. So Freenet represented the next evolution of P2P technology as it eliminated central servers and repositories. Since then, funding has poured into P2P, and this has led to the emergence of many services that leverage this particular concept. So the sharing economy, finally we come back to sharing economy, which is basically relies on this P2P principles. It is a rapidly growing sector that has the potential to transform many other facets and generate new economic activity, particularly in developing countries. In a very ideal scenario, a sharing economy improves access to goods and services for especially like marginalized groups and eliminates the need for certain middlemen who are present in other situations. But in reality, there are many challenges in actually using these internet based platforms to start businesses or accumulate capital. And as we will see later, even if their capital has been accumulated, it is very difficult to sustain in the long run. Additionally, sharing economy may lead to labor substitution and changes in the nature of institutional, regulatory, and promotional challenges for state and social groups. So now, if we look at it like as a whole, in sharing economy, Uber and Airbnb are actually some two of the most well-known examples, and we will discuss more about these aspects using examples from these companies and more. And so basically, we're going to talk about the ideal case scenario versus what is actually happening and what are the different reasons for a sharing economy to fail or sustain. So now Samita will continue.
So Airbnb is a company that allows people to rent rooms or apartments or houses. The service was launched in 2008 and now they have 7 million accommodations in over 220 countries. And coming to Uber, Uber was launched in 2009 and by mid 2014 had 8 million users and 160,000 drivers in 250 cities across 50 countries. And in December 2014, venture capitalists valued Uber at around $40 billion. But coming to today's stats, 8.4 billion is the revenue which Airbnb is making as of 2022, and the net income is $1.9 billion for Airbnb, whereas for Uber the revenue is uh, $31.87 billion, but Uber is running in losses of $9.14 billion. So we'll see the reasons why a company like Uber, which is very popular and valuable, is making so much losses. So the basic business model for both Airbnb and Uber is that they put customers in touch with the service providers via digital devices. The problem is that because of the simplicity, the products that the companies offer don't have anything special. All the apps seem to follow the basic template. Like all Uber Eats is an app plus a business model. All Lyft Eats is an app and a business model. Same as with Airbnb. There is not anything special about the different companies other than the beauty of the app and the prices they charge. So those two ways are the only ways for which the companies can compete with each other. The beauty of an app will not make or break the success of the company. All the customers care about is the price. So the companies try to reduce the price in order to compete in the market and avoid other people taking away the customers. So this in turn forces Uber, for example, in case it has reduced the prices to fight with other companies, it'll force to reduce or cut the driver's pay, which in turn is not satisfied to the drivers and they lose some part of the providers. And also the services or the design which they make is very easy to copy. Like for example, prevent there's nothing that prevents outsiders from replicating the business model. For example, Airbnb was a huge success, but nothing is stopping Marriott from starting their own home rental service. Actually, Marriott did start a service, Marriott Homes and Villas. It's still developing. And all these sharing economy products don't have any brand loyalty. The company has to have a moat around your castle that prevents competitors from crossing and taking over your market share. A barrier to entry, basically. Apple has that moat, and the companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi have it. Even though Pepsi is cheaper, the Coca-Cola fans will try and buy them, so they have a mode. But we generally don't find Uber fans or Ola fans, so it's just restricted like people try to shift from one platform to other wherever it is cheaper. So none of the sharing companies have any brand loyalty precisely because there is nothing special about their brand. And also huge expenses for sales and marketing and R&D. Uber is also investing in various other research activities like autonomous vehicles and all. So it is hoping to go driverless one day and cut off eliminate all the drivers it is having. But that itself has many constraints to it, like it has to rent a new fleet of cars. It has many other constraints to it. And Uber Eats, it's also expanding. It is expanding it to Uber Eats and also renting electric bikes and scooters. So in order to enter into all these markets, the company has burned through the money while keeping rates low and competing with the numerous rivals. And it is also having many regulatory issues. Uber does not meet the regulatory requirements applying to the taxi industry. For instance, a local court in Istanbul came to a verdict on the case that City's Taxi Drivers Association against the US-based ride service Uber. The court ruled on an unfair competition and banned access to Uber's mobile application in Turkey. So there are many regulatory issues in various countries, and Uber has to fight back or come back with new models to fight there. And the main difference between Uber and Airbnb is that Airbnb does not intervene in any transaction charges. Like it allows the guest to deal with the renters directly, whereas Uber sets the price for every ride which we are taking. And Uber also pays an hourly wage in addition to the commission to the driver, and also lowers the price for the users. So this way, Uber is subsidizing both the sides, the provider and the user. But Airbnb takes 6 to 12% from the guest fee plus 3 to 5% from the property owner. So it is charging both the sides, Airbnb. So European Court of Justice has declared that Uber was a taxi-based company, whereas Airbnb was a technical company, and will go more theoretically, and Janvi will continue from here.
Okay, so now I'm going to elaborate at the point where the actual promise of sharing economy is meeting reality. So, so now, basically, there's said to be four major points which lead to the failure of sharing economy in real life. That are weak network effects, limited economies of scale, multi-homing, and subsidies. I'm going to elaborate on each of these one by one. So I'm going to start with weak network effects. So as we know, network effects refer to the phenomena that the value of a product or service that is being offered increases as more people keep on joining. So here in our case, in the scenario of sharing economy, weak network effects is said to be a very, very big challenge. So unlike the network-oriented business that we see like our social media platforms, sharing economies, they mostly rely on a transactional based model. What do I mean by that? Basically, if there are not enough users, providers, or customers in a specific area, the benefits of that specific company start to diminish. I'll give you a simple example of Uber that we know. If there are not enough drivers in a particular city, the riders of that area may be less likely to use that specific ride sharing service. Similarly, if we take the example of Airbnb, if we have if there are not enough hosts in that specific area, the travelers may be less likely to use a home sharing service like Airbnb for that specific area. This can lead to kind of like a lack of supply and demand, as we can see, which can ultimately reduce the effectiveness of of the sharing economy company in that area. In addition to what I talked about, weak network effects can also lead to what we call is lack of trust and reliability on the platform. What do I mean by that? If there are not enough users or providers using that service, it may be difficult to find more users, right? To find more users which will use that service, or even to find more providers which will provide that service. This can lead to kind of like a negative feedback loop where users are discouraged from using the platform, which leads to fewer providers and which in turn discourages the users. Sharing economy platforms often rely on large number of users and providers for the income. That means through commissions or through fees, as we talked about, like Airbnb takes guest fees. So if there are not enough users or providers on the platform, the platform can struggle to generate enough income or revenue to cover the cost or maintain themselves in the long term. So we'll come to the second point, which is the limited economies of scale. So now the limited, if a sharing economy company has limited economies with them, then they may become more resistant to change and innovation, which could in turn make it harder for them to gain attraction from the common user database. The new ventures, as Samita talked about, like new ventures often have huge expenses for sales, marketing, for even something like R&D. Even legal challenges also add to the cost and depress operations. For example, Airbnb had to sit and negotiate with several cities to pay to pay hotel taxes and to avoid being shut down. But what I thought about, there could be benefits of limited economies also, which is that it may create more opportunities for these sharing economy platform to fulfill unmet needs. What I mean by that is, for example, if you have a small town where the public transportation is very limited, a ride sharing platform could provide an important service to these residents who need to get around. Similarly, if you have a peer-to-peer lending platform, could provide an access to credit for people who may not have a traditional banking option available, easily available to them. Now let's move forward to elaborating on how multi-homing plays a crucial role for a sharing economy company. So as we know, multi-homing refers to a practice where you have multiple platforms or providers for a specific to access a particular service or resource in the sharing economy. So now I'm going to talk about two sides over here. We have the demand side and we have the supply side. So now if there's multi-homing happening on the demand side, it can lead to increased competition between the sharing economy platforms. So what happens is sometimes we as users, we have switched between different platforms. We go from checking the prices on Uber, we then switch to Ola, we go to Rapido. Because what we are doing is at the end of the day, we are finding the best price or the most convenient service for us, which can in turn actually put pressure on these platforms to improve their offerings or prices. So now on the supply side, if there's multi-homing happening on the supply side, it can increase competition amongst the providers itself, which can drive down the prices and make it more difficult for these platforms to make a sustainable income. So now I'll talk about how subsidies will affect sharing economies. So as we know that the basic aim of platforms is to bring together the users with the providers. But one side of the market is always said to be more important to attract the other side. So the company, it's the job of the platform company to identify and subsidize that all important side. Because subsidizing that all important side will help attract more users into the picture, more providers to the platform, which can lead to increased network effects. For example, if you have a ride sharing platform, it will be very good if you provide more incentives to the drivers so that they get encouraged to join the platform and provide more rides. However, subsidizing the important side can also create challenges. For example, if a platform decides to subsidize the provider side, then it can lead to a situation where the providers are solely dependent on the platform for their income and they may struggle to make a living without subsidies. And on the other side, if the platform decides to subsidize the user side, it could lead to a situation where the users only use the platform when there are some incentives available rather than using it because it's actually a valuable service. So thus, a decision to subsidize the important side, which side to subsidize, should be based on a careful analysis of the platform's goals and potential impacts of the subsidies. So as talked before, Uber decided to subsidize both of its sides, subsidize the riders also and subsidize the drivers also. Whereas Airbnb, on the other hand, it didn't subsidize both of its sides. It basically kept both of its sides, the host and the travelers, on the money side. So yeah, Samita will now conclude the entire presentation.
So to sustain in the long run, Uber has to crush a small army of competitors, but it's likely to exhaust all the capital before that happens. And also when it comes to its idea of self-driving cars, there are huge obstacles, including not just technical challenges, but also a maze of regulatory hurdles. Most of the sharing economy ventures are very small in comparison to Uber, but many of them seem to suffer from the same problem. Basically, they have to spend more on subsidies and marketing and to get users and providers to their product. So all of its revenue is being exhausted doing so. We will know for sure how viable these ventures are for the long run as more time passes and when more of them release detailed financial information or simply run out of venture capital and shut down. So we can conclude that while the sharing economy has the potential to revolutionize the way we share and interact with one another, it has also encountered various challenges and limitations in the real world. As the sharing economy continues to evolve and expand, it will be important to address these issues in order to create a more sustainable and equitable sharing economy for all.
Thank you, everyone. Do you have any questions? Have any questions?
So Abhignya, Janvi, and one more I forgot. So excellent presentation. I mean, in fact, it was a very good presentation, and then you understood the way in which the sharing platforms work. In fact, as a corollary to it, I think we should discuss the specific case of Upgrad being our technology service provider in the next class, because they are also running into many of the problems that you have discussed. Okay, so we'll do an analysis of Upgrad sometime in the next session or so. I also have to discuss the SVB collapse because it might be of interest to some of you, and the changes in the crowdfunding model, the regulatory implications of the change in the crowdfunding model for peer-to-peer lending. So these are three things that that I want to cover in the next session. So any questions for the group?
No questions, sir.
Okay. So thank you. And the Friday is a non-instruction day, so we have to compensate this. So I'll send through LMS possible time for us to make up for the last sessions. Okay. Thank you. Take care. Janvi, you can post it in LMS, your presentation.
Okay, sure. So I've submitted on LMS. That's okay, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.